Hi there, and welcome to Revisiting VeggieTales. I'm not Bob the Tomato or Larry the Cucumber, and I'm probably not going to answer any of your questions. Unless your question is, Mariah, what are you doing? And the answer to that is simple. This isn't a video essay series. I'm not going to be cutting to any of the clips from the show. This is just me revisiting every episode of VeggieTales and talking to my webcam about it after. Probably with a lot of jump cuts and a lot of bad editing. I totally get if that's not your cup of tea, and I would not be offended if you exited out of this video to find something closer to what you were looking for. This really is just a thing I'm doing during the pandemic to entertain myself and hopefully entertain some friends. And hey, if I entertain some strangers along the way, that's the most I could have asked for. So today I'm going to be talking about Where is God When I'm Scared, which was originally released on December 21st, 1993. Obviously, I do remember this one from childhood. This was the first video that the company ever made, though it wasn't the first, second, or even third episode that we owned. My mom actually bought us the Very Silly Songs tape before this one, so my introduction to a lot of the songs were actually through that video, rather than the context of the episode. Speaking of Very Silly Songs, would you like to see a video on that even though it's a compilation without any plot? Leave a comment below. Going into this, based on what I could remember, I was expecting rough animation and heavy Christian overtones. I remembered Larry's low dopey voice and Dad Asparagus being the one and the only, the VeggieTales bae. I expected the first segment to be kind of choppy and awkward, but with one or two really funny lines, and the last segment to be more engaging, but with fewer jokes that I would still find funny. And I didn't think there was going to be anything from the Water Buffalo song to remember, cause it's permanently seared in my brain. We open on the very first opening countertop, and the very first note I made was that while I remembered Larry's low dopey voice, Bob's voice was a lot higher and more nasally than I was anticipating. So Bob and Larry have received a letter, and it's an actual physical letter. I think this was meant to be a scale gag, but seeing a giant piece of paper on the countertop made me a little uneasy. What made me more uneasy, though, was there was an actual voice of either a real child or someone pretending to be a child reading the letter, and it sounded sarcastic AF. But they have a letter from a kid who's afraid of the dark, so it's Bob and Larry to the rescue with their stories. The first segment is called Tales from the Crisper, which opens on Junior Asparagus watching a scary show called Frankencelery, which I only bring up because one of the actor voices Phil Vischer is using is actually the voice he would later use for Jimmy Gord, but there'll be more about Jimmy Gord in episode 3. Junior's mom tells him it's time for bed, and Junior's mom sounded a lot different than I remembered her sounding. Also, she uses the word skedaddle, so I was given no choice but to stand her forever. Junior goes up to his room feeling afraid from the show, and then due to a thunder and lightning storm, Bob and Larry just fall out of the ceiling. Okay, great. We're really going with that. Despite Junior being 5 years old, meaning he can handle being scared, Bob and Larry sing him a little song anyway. The song is called God is Bigger Than the Boogeyman. Perhaps you've heard of it. If you're watching this video, I'm just assuming you've heard this song many times. Junior also lists some other scary characters he's seen, which includes King Kong. So this kid has watched King Kong and Frankenstein. That's just my best friend Lori. But anyway, Bob and Larry introduce Junior to Phil Winkelstein, an actor from Toledo who plays Frankencelery, once again driving home the fact that God is watching over him, which means he doesn't have to be afraid. They sing a longer version of the song, and then everyone but Junior disappears. I am 26 years old, and I am still not sure if Bob and Larry are meant to be mythical creatures with supernatural powers, or if this was all meant to be in Junior's imagination. I really don't. But anyway, Junior's dad, the original DILF, comes in to make sure Junior's okay. Junior tells him he's not afraid because God is bigger. Junior's dad is proud of him, blah, blah, blah. I love you, little mister. And I love you, big mister. Gets me every time. I did make a note that the segment ends with Junior going to sleep while an instrumental of God is Bigger is playing very loudly over him. I think it was to end on a strong musical beat, because Junior just going to bed was like a weird place to end it. But it still felt weird to watch, just didn't sit right. And the moment I'm sure most of you are waiting for is, of course, the silly song. But it's the Water Buffalo song. Other than the Hairbrush song and the Pirates Don't Do Anything, this is probably the most popular one. just in terms of people who don't really know what VeggieTales is still knowing it. The only real notes I made is that, Larry's big elongated note at the end still slaps. And that Archibald running Larry over at the end got a big chuckle out of me. The song is silly, and it's catchy. It's a solid silly song moment TM emoji. The second segment in this one is Daniel in the Lion's Den. It's the first biblical retelling in the series, which is definitely worth noting. We open on Archibald Asparagus as King Darius singing about a dream that needs interpreting, and the song slaps. Although seeing Archibald without a monocle did make me uncomfortable. Darius's wise men suggest that Daniel interprets the dream, which he does, and then the wise men are like, "Ruh-roh, Shaggy, now the king likes Daniel more than he likes us. We gotta do something about that." And the song they sing about that slaps. They devise a plan to trick the king into passing a law that would target Daniel, and the song they sing about that, you guessed it, slaps. So the wise men find Daniel and they toss him in with the lions, but Daniel's got the power of God and anime on his side. Or, maybe just the first one. But anyway, King Darius, who is now wearing a monocle, which made me very confused, comes to mourn Daniel, but shy a surprise, the lions didn't eat him. This one also ends on an instrumental, but it's while Darius and Daniel chase the wise men off screen, so it felt a lot less awkward. The ending countertop had nothing to really write home about. Bob does get interrupted by the What We Have Learned Today song, which started the greatest feud in cinematic history, and QWERTY gives a recipe for meatloaf instead of a verse initially, which I don't have anything to add to, I just felt like it needed to be noted. Overall, the episode held up a lot better than I thought it would, but I went into it fully prepared to be let down. Tales from the Crisper's animation, while still rough and choppy, was a lot more fluid than I remembered. The lesson was a little heavy-handed, but the script was written in a way where it was definitely intentional. It didn't feel like overkill just because the lesson was the whole plot. The moment in that one that got the biggest chuckle out of me was when Bob wanted to show Junior the stars, so he takes him to the window and asks, "What do you see up there?" just for Junior to say, "My curtains!" Daniel in the Lion's Den slaps, if for nothing else than just the music. It also made me laugh a lot more than Tales from the Crisper did, and I want to specifically call attention to the moment when the wise men find Daniel and the door swings shut on them. I had to pause because I'd completely forgotten about it, and it's still genuinely funny. The lesson is taught in a clear way, and it doesn't really hit you over the head too much with it. Archibald Asparagus is an absolute star in this episode. From the first moments of the silly song feud with Larry, to his wonderfully dramatic star turn as King Darius and Daniel in the Lion's Den, he stole the show. If this were Drag Race and I was Ross or Carson, I'd say, keep your eye on that one. The animation isn't great, but it holds up a lot better than I remembered. And when you take into account that this was 2 years before Toy Story, that does count for a lot. I wouldn't necessarily pick this as a jumping off point for introducing someone new to the series, especially someone who's not Christian, but if you are looking to revisit a childhood favorite or introduce a young kid in a Christian family to a new series, this episode does hold up. Not as well as some of the others, I'm sure will, but it holds up nonetheless. And that's all the time we have for today, kids. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a regular upload schedule or if I'll just post these as I complete them, but do keep an eye out for episode 2, which should be coming out sometime within the next week.